Hello and welcome back to the Lore Raider. In today's lore video, I want to cover an extremely misunderstood species that has unfortunately been the subject of, let's say, bad theory crafting for quite some time, also as being perhaps one of the most influential and important species in the Metroid universe, the space dragons. So, without further delay, let's just jump right into the video. The space dragons are, as I said, one of the most influential species in the Metroid series, as one of their members, Ridley, is highly implied to be one of, if not the founding member of the early space pirate faction, as he would be the architect for many of the space pirates' earliest atrocities, including the massacre on K-12, and as well as the slaughter on planet Naishi. And fittingly, the organization's final days would be ruled by yet another space dragon, that being Greed, who shifted the organization's power base to the extreme galaxy where it would suffer ultimately its final fatal blow. While it's easy to say between Greed and Ridley this species has given us two of the most infamous figures in galactic history, I want to focus on what we know about the species as a whole. Biologically speaking, we know the space dragons have a three-step life cycle, starting off as their so-called little birdie phase, a very small creature that somewhat resembles a overgrown chicken with a row of razor-sharp teeth on either side of its mouth. Even in this form, the space dragons are very intelligent, as little birdie demonstrates an ability to scavenge off the remains of defeated enemies, or sort of lure others to kill the prey it wants to eat, as it did with Samus Aran in Other M. By the second stage of its life cycle, they become a moderately large reptile-like creature. This form still sports the fur, as well as introducing the species' signature spiked tail and four limbs, although in this case their front limbs don't seem to be used as arms quite yet. However, this is just an intermediary phase, as the Ridley clone only stays in this form for at most a few hours, before advancing to the mature adult form, the form that we most associate with the word space dragon. Space dragons are probably one of the most well-adapted species in the entire series. As adults, they're capable of flying, breathing fire, surviving in the vacuum of space even, and an extreme level of resilience and regeneration, as Ridley, for his part, regenerated from nothing more than literal burning ash in Zero Mission back to his fully flesh form in Super Metroid in a little over a year. And Greed, for his part, was able to survive literally being ripped apart by a black hole for some time before dying, but it's a black hole. Not exactly an anti-feat, if you ask me. At first glance, the space dragons might seem to be a race of natural-born leaders, and it's a fair assumption. I mean, we know Ridley was the leader of the early space pirates, and Greed took charge of the entire organization after the death of Mother Brain and the collapse of its Milky Way territories. But these are the exceptions, as Greed gives us our first real insight into the species, as he explains that after the death of Ridley in Super Metroid, the entire space dragon civilization not only collapsed, but to quote the dragon himself, was utterly destroyed. While small, this line tells us a lot. For one, no, Ridley is not a Chozo experiment. There is an established species, so the so-called theory can be thrown in the trash where it belongs. But secondly, we get another glimpse into space dragon culture from Grey Voice in the prequel manga, who points out the civility that Greed and Ridley seem to display are just a charade to hide the species' animalistic tendencies. That the space dragon culture is one on which they steal from every race imaginable, all to feed a massive superiority complex. Grey Voice ultimately calls them beasts indulging in petty desires, and that there explains it all. Because whilst under Ridley, things were great. They ruled over the space pirates as a whole. But once he and Mother Brain were out of the picture, and the space pirates devolved back into non-sentient animals, the entire species immediately fell apart, either incapable or unwilling to keep their own society afloat. And that is it for the lore of the space dragons. I think it's a fascinating commentary on the fragility of systems propped up and around single individuals. How in the short term there can indeed be prosperity and success, but such regimes rarely survive the oppression that founded them. If only Greed had focused more on rebuilding his species than obtaining personal power. But then, his name is Greed.